Hello and welcome to Riverland Women, the podcast which celebrates the amazing achievements and inspiring stories of women across South Australia's Riverland. I'm your host, Kerry Lush from the podcast station. Join me each fortnight as we meet some of the extraordinary women who call this region home. This is Riverland Women. Life can be a funny thing. Sometimes circumstances lead you on a completely different journey than you expected. That was certainly the case for Karlene Maywald before she won the seat of Chaffey in the 1997 election. She was also a trailblazer for women in politics.
It was a very steep learning curve as a new parliamentarian and having the balance of power and having my first child. So I had three fronts on which I was doing all these firsts in. But I was also the first woman elected to the seat of Chaffey. I was also the first woman to be the head of the parliamentary party in the National Party right across Australia. I'm also now, just recently, the first woman to be appointed as the chair of the Adelaide Festival Centre Trust. So there's still some firsts that are happening in my life as we speak.
Karlene navigated the complexities of water management during one of the worst droughts in recorded history and played a pivotal role in the Murray Darling Basin Plan. So how did that all come about? This is Karlene's story.
I was born in Melbourne, actually, and grew up in northeastern Melbourne till I was 11 or 12 and we moved to Waikerie in the Riverland. And so I finished high school in Waikerie. My family, my mother still lives in Waikerie with her husband, and nieces and nephews still live there. Great connection to the Riverland still there. And of course, all of the wonderful friends that I have in the Riverland. So we get back quite regularly. So my schooling was at Waikerie High School. And then from there, I went on and did a whole range of different things. I had a multitude of career changes over my time, starting with a short stint at university, which I didn't like particularly much, and went on to do nursing and didn't quite finish my registered nursing and decided that wasn't for me, and went on into do transport, logistics, fashion. I worked with major department stores, and then I went on to do malting and brewing. So, I built mini microbreweries and taught people how to brew beer. So I had quite a diverse background of skills that I'd gained over the years. And when I came back to Waikerie in 1995, after my father sadly passed away at the young age of 58, and my husband and I put our lives on hold in Victoria and came back to help Mum sort of consolidate the businesses, and the rest is history. 18 months later, I was elected to the seat of Chaffey and our lives were changed forever.
What was your family business?
Well, the family businesses ranged. Mum and Dad had the Holden dealership for a time. Had Waikerie Crash Repairs, the menswear shop. They also Mum had a financial planning business and a few other bits and pieces that kept them pretty busy. So there was lots of variety there. Oh, and they had the school buses and the charter buses. Mum still has the school buses and charter bus business in Waikerie at the grand old age of 84. So she has Charmaine who manages that for her, which is amazing. So that business has been in the family since 1974 when we moved to Waikerie. So that was the purpose for the move, was Mum and Dad bought the school buses and charter bus business.
Right, and then they expanded from there with all the other businesses.
That's right, yes. Yes, Dad was a bit of an entrepreneur and Mum was a willing participant in all of that. Mum kept all of us kids, there was 4 of us in the family, and we were all very, very active in every sport you can possibly imagine. I played netball, basketball, tennis, water skied, you name it, we did it, and had lots of fun as kids. It was a great life growing up in Waikerie.
Did you ever think you'd go back there?
Yes, we always thought that there was probably a reason to come back, and that was it was brought forward a little sooner when Dad passed away, and of course then it was actually not expected to win the seat of Chaffey. It was a campaign run on make it marginal to make it matter, because it was a very safe Liberal Party seat. So whilst we ran a very hard and very good campaign, we thought the chances of winning were pretty slim. So it wasn't a great expectation in the campaign. I thought I'd run to learn a little bit more about politics and and to actually make the seat a little bit more marginal so that it would have a little bit more focus in Adelaide, because, of course, it's a very city-state of South Australia, with most of the population living in Adelaide. So therefore the influence from a political context is very strong from a metropolitan base. So that was the purpose of running, and to find myself elected and having a bit of the balance of power at that time was a huge learning curve.
So you're almost the accidental politician.
Yeah, well, people have referred to me as that, and I know it's probably correct. Yes, accidental, but certainly very grateful to have had the opportunity. It was an amazing time, and it was an incredible privilege to represent the seat of Chaffey, and in particular in such a difficult time, and to make some of the decisions that I made along the way to enable us to have maximum influence in that time where reform was just going to happen with or without us, and to be in the driving seat in the negotiations around the Murray Darling Basin table during the development of the Basin Plan on behalf of South Australia was an absolute privilege. And we got some things right. There's some things that we wish we could have done a little bit better. But that's the way politics is. It's the art of compromise and getting sufficient consensus to act. Because if you go in with you're not going to accept anything but the absolute gold-plated result, you'll never get anywhere. You I guess scatter the horses and you won't be able to move the herd forward. So during those times, I reflect back on the negotiations that we had, the intensity of the circumstances that we're all dealing with. Every state had, massive problems to deal with, and so it was a journey that has given me an enormous amount of experience, knowledge, and expertise, which I'm now using every day. And I work a lot in overseas jurisdictions, working government to government, and assisting governments who are looking at embarking upon a reform journey and sharing our experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, not sort of saying, what we've done is exactly right, but what we've done has been a journey and an experience, and perhaps if they're considering doing something similar, what are the pitfalls they may come up against, and that's, I find, very rewarding work.
Now, you're elected as a National Party member, but then you sided with the Labor government, something that the Nationals don't generally do. What was your reasoning behind that?
I was elected national and stayed national, and I've been National Party ever since, and I'm in fact a life member of the National Party, and it's the National Party of South Australia. The way the National Party works is not like the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party has state branches. The National Party has a party in each state, and they federate to form the National Party federally. So, for example, David Littleproud is a member of the Liberal National Party in Queensland. I was a member of the National Party of Australia, South Australia Incorporated. And I stayed and remained a member of that party for my entire duration. What I did do, though, was make a decision to accept a position in Cabinet with an agreement with the Premier. It was not agreement with the Labor Party, and I didn't caucus with the Labor Party, and nor did I vote to install a Labor Party government. I joined the Cabinet 2 years into that government, so they had been well and truly entrenched. The vote that determined the Labor government was Peter Lewis's, and I actually voted for the continuance of a coalition, not a coalition government, a Liberal government. There's no coalition in South Australia. And so it was quite interesting because it's hard to describe that. It's a really complicated relationship that hasn't happened before, and so it was very easy for people to misconstrue it as a crossing the floor or jumping ship from my party origins, but I certainly didn't do that, and I had the support of the membership of the party here in South Australia. There were a few ruffled feathers at the federal level because they were in coalition with the Liberal Party and were in government at the federal level. However, we worked our way through that because as leader of the National Party in South Australia, which I was by default because there was only one member, so I was the leader. I sat around the federal executive of the National Party federally, and the constitution of the federal party requires that each state leader sits on the executive. And I did step aside for one meeting, which was immediately after my decision to join, to accept the cabinet position. And that was because it was just before there was an upcoming election, and they felt that it would be prudent for me just to step aside from that one meeting because of the perception of me being within a Labor cabinet and also on the Executive National Party, who were about to run an election against the Labor Party. So you can understand, and the conversations were, look, I think this is probably the best thing, and we both agreed that's the case. But then I went straight back to it after that and worked as one of the team there at the federal level as well. So I guess you could say I had a foot in each camp. However, I wasn't caucusing with the Labor Party, whereas I did have that internal discussions with the National Party. And I think the interesting thing about that also was the decision to take on that was not because I wanted a ministerial position. And in actual fact, when I was approached by a couple of members of the Labor Party who made the offer to me, I said to them, don't be ridiculous, I'm a National Party person, I can't be in a Labor cabinet. And they said they thought that I could because they wanted to give me the water portfolio. And that sort of took me back, took my breath away a little bit, like the water portfolio, the most important portfolio to my electorate at the time of the greatest need of my electorate for leadership in the water sector. And I would be taking on that role with a set of rules that enabled me to step aside from cabinet when matters affected my electorate or the business community, which are the two areas where I was most likely to have a point of difference with the policy positions of the Labor Party. And I did, in fact, cross the floor as a government minister 25 times during my time as a minister. And the world didn't end, surprise, surprise. We got back to doing the business that we could agree upon and focused on what we could agree upon, not what we could disagree upon. And my role in water was 2 years, and it was the next election in 2006. So I joined the cabinet in 2004. And in 2006, the seat of Chaffey overwhelmingly re-elected me. And so I got a very strong bounce in my vote, and that was really resounding support for the position that I had placed Chaffey in. So Chaffey was placed in a position of greater influence, not only at the state level, but at the national level because of my role around the Ministerial Council. So having a role around the Ministerial Council of the Murray Darling Basin Commission, and then being the state's negotiator on the Basin Plan. And quite often I hear from my colleagues upstream that there's a great concern that South Australia got too good a deal. And you hear that all the time. And I think we got a really good deal. At the end of the day, we're all going to have serious issues to deal with as climate change hits hard, and the forecasts of longer, drier periods and more intense rainfall at different times, and a change in the variability and how we manage that. South Australia needs to be in a strong position. And I think we now currently are. But there's still a huge amount of work to be done. So getting back to the politics of making that decision, I had to think long and hard, and spoke to some very close confidence about, I would be saying no because there is a coalition in another jurisdiction that had nothing to do with the issues that we were dealing with in South Australia in regards to the compounding impact of drought right across the Murray-Darling Basin. And I felt that I would have been abrogating my responsibility to say no. And I knew it was going to be challenging. I knew it'd be a hard sell because there is there's an ingrained thinking that if you've got your colours, tattooed to your arm, that's where they stay. And if you change, you're a traitor as such. But in actual fact, I felt to myself that I was not. I was not leaving my party. I was sticking to my colours. I was staying with my party. I was not joining the Labor Party. I was not installing a Labor government. I was simply taking on a role that was going to give us the most influence possible around the issue that was of most importance to us at a time when we most needed it.
So that was an unprecedented role. And another thing that you did that was unprecedented, you were one of the trailblazers of women in politics. You had your daughter Tilly while you held the seat. What was that like? And do you think things have changed now?
Well, when I was first elected in 1997, there were no women's toilets on the floor where the House of Assembly was. The women's toilets were on the way over the other side, past the Legislative Council on the second floor. It was the women's powder room. So when I was first elected, that was what we came into the parliament. They realised they had 14 women elected at that election of both Labor, Liberal and myself, which meant that they had to quickly change the facilities on that floor and constructed some ladies' toilets on that floor. But you can see how far we've had to come in that period of time. Now, I got elected in 1997 and had the balance of power, first time in Parliament, not really having a lot of understanding of how Parliament worked. So I had a very steep learning curve from that perspective, and then found I was pregnant the following April. And so Tilly was the first baby born to a sitting member in the South Australian Parliament. And it was a fantastic experience, I have to say. The Parliament was not set up for, having little people running around, and certainly had not considered what the needs might be. But I was really fortunate that the Speaker of the House at the time was John Oswald, and he had just become a grandfather to twin granddaughters. And so he was very attuned to the excitement of becoming a grandfather. And so he bent over backwards to ensure that the needs that we discovered we needed were catered for. And I didn't know what I was going to need until he was my first child as well. And so we just worked through on a case-by-case basis on what we would need to do. So, for example, there was a lot of, are you going to breastfeed on the floor of Parliament House? And I said, no, I'm not. It's, why would you do that to your baby? You as a reporter on the ABC wouldn't breastfeed your baby and do an interview at the same time. So why would you expect me to take my baby into the floor of the House and breastfeed? There was an appropriate way to deal with that. And that was how I worked it out with the Speaker, was that I could, if I was feeding, I could walk in to the strangers gallery up the top, and if I wasn't down the bottom, he would look up, which was just across the hall from my office, so it wasn't sort of having to fly downstairs when the bells rang. And if I wasn't on the floor, he would look up and acknowledge me in the House and see which side I was standing on, and that would be accepting my vote. Now, it never happened. I didn't have to do it, but there was a provision there if the situation arose. There was also a small room adjacent to where my office was that they turned into a little nursery with a fridge and a recliner chair and a dimmer light. And they even put Tilly's name on the door when she was born. And it was just a lovely, lovely time. And they catered for her in the dining room, and Dean and Tilly could come down and felt very warm and very welcomed by the parliamentary staff in particular. So I had a really good experience, and I reflect back on that, and I think a lot of change occurred. There has been a number of babies born to sitting members since, and there's two at the moment, I think. There's two women parliamentarians that are either just one's given birth, and the other one's about to. So it's changed things forever. It was a very steep learning curve as a new parliamentarian, and having the balance of power and having my first child. So I had three fronts on which I was doing all these firsts in. But I was also the first woman elected to the seat of Chaffey. I was also the first woman to be the head of the parliamentary party in the National Party right across Australia. I'm also now, just recently, the first woman to be appointed as the chair of the Adelaide Festival Centre Trust. So there's still some firsts that are happening in my life as we speak, and it's one of those things that you just I don't think about it often, but when it's pointed out to you, you go, oh yeah, I did, that's right, and it's just a matter of the things that arose at the time. I had no compunction. I just used to, if the door was open a bit, I'd walk straight through it, and if someone offered me something, I'd say yes, and then work out how to do it later. And so I think that's the history of my career, and that's why I've probably had so many firsts.
So probably a bit like being a first-time mum. You don't know what you don't know.
That's exactly right. And it was the same in the parliamentary role. I learned some very interesting lessons early on, and that was that whenever someone comes to see you, they only tell you the little bit of the story that they want you to know to support the outcome that they want to achieve. There's always a much bigger picture, and finding out where you get that bigger picture from is always important before you make a decision or a commitment to anything, and I learned that very early on. Also, surrounding yourself with good people and enabling them to be the best that they can be. My team in the Chaffey office was amazing. My ministerial office was just incredible. Because I had an arrangement with the Premier, I didn't have the normal requirement to have, party people employed in my office. So I had best people for the job and didn't really care what party they belonged to. I had all sorts of party members. I had, people who had been members of the Liberal Party, people who had never been a member of a party, and they all worked well together in my office. In fact, my chief of staff was the former chief of staff for the National Party Prime Minister in New Zealand at one stage, and he was my chief of staff, and so he had to negotiate working with the other chief of staffs in the Labor context as well. So it was an interesting time for all of us, but our office was a fantastic environment with an amazing group of people who just, I didn't do the job alone, put it that way. There were so many good people. And the relationship that we had with the government agencies was really important as well, because the government agencies are the people who do the legwork on the policy development and all of those sorts of things, and having very strong and robust relationships with those agency people was critically important. And having the confidence of the Premier to establish the Water Security Council, which was a different way of making decisions, was really important as well. And that Water Security Council was the way in which we enabled a streamlined process. It was made up of 8 different agencies and a couple of independents, and it was the one pathway into Cabinet on all decisions. So Ag was around the table, mining, transport with the ferries and the like, health with water quality, SA Water, the EPA, the Department of Environment, and Treasury. Of course, we had to have the money around the table as well, and so we had that as a really great forum that enabled us to get to the nitty-gritty of what the problems were, and then call in expertise from either the research world or the international expertise where we didn't have it locally, to help us with things like acid sulfate soils and the like. Yeah, so it was a very interesting time, and there were just so many layers involved in it, and it wasn't funny.
So your time as the member for Chaffey came to an end in 2010. Tell me about that time. Did you feel like you had unfinished business? Obviously, it didn't go the way you would have liked. How did you cope with all of that?
Look, it's the immediate response is to feel really, really devastated, and that what could you have done more? But the truth is that to get elected at that election, I would have had to resign from Cabinet and join the chorus of critics. Because after 4 years since the 2006 election, with it just the drought just getting deeper and deeper and deeper, people were hurting so much, and I certainly, really felt their pain immensely. But the decisions that were being made in Cabinet and the fights I was having in Cabinet to ensure that the voice of the regional communities were heard when there was overwhelming environmental and urban needs that were sitting around that table as well. And I felt that if I did do what I knew I had to do to win, which was to resign from Cabinet and become a critic of government, I would have left us in a position where the decisions that could have been made, the ones that I was fighting hard against, would have been made. And it was right at the time when we were at the deepest, darkest depths of the drought. And we were also at the time when we were, really negotiating hard on what the Basin Plan was going to look like, and ensuring that South Australia's, exemplary behaviour in the past with capping 10 years, 15 years earlier than every other state in regards to how much water was being taken out of the system. All of those things that we'd done over the previous years prior to the cap being put in place in 95, and now the Basin Plan, were recognised in the Basin Plan, were hard-won battles. And, whilst I was disappointed, I was also, I guess, relieved in a way, I think is another way of looking at it, that I when it stopped, I did not realise how much, until it stopped, I did not realise how much it had consumed me, or was consuming every minute of my waking moment and every minute of my family's waking moment. So Tilly had turned 12, and so she didn't know any different than just this intense life where Dad was the mayor and Mum was the minister. And she grew up going to electorate events every Saturday and every Sunday, and most nights of the week she was doing something to do with council or something to do with my work, or coming to Adelaide with me. So she didn't know any different. So after a while, when the disappointment subsided and it was like this great weight had lifted off my shoulders to a certain extent, where the intensity of the role was realised, and and then I could sit back and I could go, wow, what we did, what we achieved. And then it rained, which was really good, so the pressure was lifted, but it was just so I guess the way I look back at it now is I was so grateful to have had the opportunity. It was an incredible privilege, and I learnt so much, and that has stood me in such good stead in everything I've done since. And it's also given me a real great sense of urgency to give back. I learnt so much during that period of time. And what am I going to do with that in my next life and my next job? It has to come and to do something. And so that's why I decided very early on that I wanted to play a more global role in the water challenges of the world, rather than just the water challenges of the Murray Darling Basin, to take a bigger picture look and to work with developing countries in particular who have some, we think we've got challenges. Oh boy, they've got big challenges, and populations that are unbelievable, and demands on resources that are just so unsustainable, and they don't even have water, the first steps towards water accounting in place. And so working in that environment gives me the opportunity to really invest that knowledge and that experience that I had in providing thinking to other countries who are struggling with how to manage water.
You've now moved away from the Riverland. Why did you decide to leave?
Well, the decision to move away from the Riverland was simply because the roles that I was looking to take on, and in fact did take on, required me to be closer to the airport and closer to Adelaide for meeting times. We didn't have the benefit of COVID giving us Teams and Zoom as we do now, but the turnaround for an hour meeting backwards and forwards to the Riverland just wasn't practical with the amount of work that I was doing down there. And so we drew a line, about maximum hour commute around Adelaide, and ended up at Langhorne Creek, which is right on that hour. We didn't want to live in the city, but we certainly knew that for me to be able to fulfil my dream to actually work in that global sense is that I needed to be closer to Adelaide. I could be spending a lot more time in Canberra and interstate, and also internationally. So I do a lot of travel now. I'm engaged by the South Australian government as the South Australian Water Ambassador, and that's sort of morphed from being a strategic role in international water opportunities, in supporting businesses and companies who use specialist technology or capability in the water space, who want to actually embark upon export opportunities and in new markets internationally. So working with them, leading trade delegations, supporting trade delegations when they come to Australia, supporting government delegations when they come from different countries to Australia, and working with the government on general water issues and providing general advice to government. So I've been doing that for a little while now. But I also work with Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, have an organisation that they fund called the Australian Water Partnership. And the Australian Water Partnership works globally, and they have a partnership of about 190 businesses from across Australia that support them in their endeavours to be the front door to the Australian water reform journey and the Australian water resource management processes, because much of it's embedded in the states, and so it was quite challenging for the federal government to have the whole story. So I do a lot of work in that space. Recently in Thailand, working on capacity development with their Office of National Water Resources in dispute mitigation and dispute resolution around water. In Vietnam, around the introduction and supporting the team that helped them develop new water laws. and now working through, the decrees that they put in place to implement that. And lots of work in India. I do lots of work in India with South Australia has had in the past a strong sister state relationship with Rajasthan. And so I've done a lot of work there as well. So it's all fascinating. It's all really interesting. It's all really, really challenging, but it certainly keeps my mind active and certainly keeps me busy with the passion that I have for water.
So it sounds like you're just as busy now as you were when you were in politics. Karlene, thank you so much for having a chat to me on Riverland Women.
Thank you, Kerry. It's been an absolute pleasure and congratulations again on the initiative.
That was Karlene Maywald, former member for Chaffey and passionate water advocate. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I'd love it if you could leave a review on whichever platform you listen on, and make sure you follow Riverland Women on Facebook and Instagram, and we're also now on YouTube. Thank you for listening to Riverland Women.